This webinar this week is about disc profiles. But what it's really about is your personality type and the type of work that you should be doing. And it's actually, this is a very important webinar. I think that if you understand this, and we are going to be offering free disc tests on our site shortly, but if you understand disc profiles and how they work, which it sounds like a very boring topic, but the idea behind any type of personality profile that you take is a lot of times people end up in the wrong professions or doing the wrong type of work because they're not doing things that kind of match their personality. Determining what type of person you are and taking one of these tests means that there's certain types of work that you should be doing that you may not be doing. So a lot of people go into the practice of law, especially now, and a lot of people are going to law schools because they believe that being in the profession that is a way to make money, but there's certain characteristics of attorneys that actually make them very good. There's actually certain characteristics of different practice areas that make an attorney very good at their job. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, just to understand that. And the idea is that for you, there may be actually different types of roles within firms that will match your personality as you go forward in your career. So you may start out in one practice area or in a law firm or in-house or with the government. And if you're able to find like an employer that matches your profile and your natural interests, then that's makes you much better off in the long run. And you really do need to take into account personality, the type of person you are when you start practicing law, and as you go through your career, because if you're unhappy, what's happening in most cases is different things that you believe are important, that are fundamental to who you are, not being utilized. And if there's parts of the job that don't make you happy, then you need to go into parts of the job that were things that are being utilized. So that's something to think about. And disc profiles are interesting. I started using them a long time ago, like in 2001, 2002, and I've used them fairly consistently, but in some cases sporadically in terms of making hiring decisions, and also allowing candidates to take them and law firms to evaluate people based on them. And it actually works. And determining the right setting and stuff for your skills is important. A lot of people will go into different jobs and they'll be in the wrong skill. I see all the time attorneys go into the wrong practice area, practice setting, law firm, and many times they're in the wrong profession entirely. And it's understandable with people failing because they don't know themselves what motivates them. And so I'm going to tell you today a little bit without you having to take one of these profiles, give you a sense of how your profile may play out. And then there's lots of free disc profiles online that you can take. And it will give you an understanding of other people, the kind of people you get along with, don't get along with, and you should be working with, and it shouldn't be working with. So this is one of the reasons it's important, because if you're having problems at your job, my approach, and many times with a lot of my writings, is always a tough love. You have to shape up or ship out. And that's true to some extent. But at the same time, if you're not getting internal satisfaction or what you're doing doesn't internally motivate you, you can't be something you're not. And trying to be something you're not is a real mistake, and something that motivates you, because if your job's not in line with your values, then that can be very harmful. So not too long ago, I was meeting, and he was mentoring me for a while. A man, he runs a $150 million company painting houses and doing work for HOAs around the country. And I wanted to understand some methods that he has to evaluate people, and what he's doing in his company to make him more effective. And he's a lawyer, and he's not a lawyer and he's uneducated. However, he's become very successful by some tools that he uses to understand himself and also others. And he's the third or fourth incredibly successful entrepreneur that I've spoken with over the past several years that uses this same method to understand himself and others. And I used to use the same process for evaluating recruiters, but at some point I stopped and then started again. But the idea is that attorneys will fit into different types of law firms and practice settings, depending on how they see themselves. And the sorts of jobs that others want to plug you into will often determine whether or not you're successful. And I think a lot of times when attorneys are looking for positions and new jobs, is they believe they should be working with a particular group of people or a certain type of environment, when that could be honestly the worst thing in the world for them. And law firms that are hiring associates, partners, and others also should keep all this stuff in mind when they're hiring. So a good legal recruiter can help you narrow down the best environment for you, but you can also do a lot of this yourself. A lot of the skills that recruiters use and other people in the talent agent industry do is they will go and they'll look at your background and they'll reach conclusions about the kind of environment that you should be in, and then they'll push you in that direction. But they're not always wrong. And the guy that developed the DISC tool, I think he was a psychologist and attorney. William, I think he also went to Yale Law School. Maybe not, I don't remember, but I think he did. And it basically looks at the personality traits of dominance, influence, steadiness, and supportive, and conscientiousness. So those are, and depending on who you are, you may be highly dominant, highly influential, or highly steady and supportive, and highly conscientious. And so different, as you can imagine, different types of attorneys have different personality types depending on that. Understanding how you fit in with these different personality traits can help you and tell you a lot about where you should be practicing. So the first one is D, which is dominance. And so I'm talking today, I would talk to you about the different types of profiles and things that do in law firms. But dominance is this personality characteristic is very important to succeed in most large law firms, not all of them. And but large markets, large law firms, this characteristic is a very important one. And dominance really is about things about being like direct, very decisive in terms of how you make decisions, very driven, results, demanding, very task oriented. So if you think about many of the best attorneys, they have these characteristics. They're not just with other people, but with themselves, they're demanding and they demand results and they're very driven with themselves. And because they're driven with themselves, they expect other people to be driven. And more the largest and most competitive law firms, of course, then you will admit people that will want to be in other practice settings, because this is a characteristic that the legal profession really, I think, takes very importantly and thinks is very important. People that have high D are usually focused on getting things done. They're very passionate and they want to lead and not follow. They work very hard to achieve. They would rather be working than not working, which I'm sure may not surprise everyone on watching this, because not every attorney wants to be working. They want others to follow them, so they will get very involved in whatever they're doing, and they're less likely to ask for direction. They'll ask for direction, but they would rather be the head writer on a brief or the person that's in charge of the transaction after a certain period of time. They want to be working all the time. They want to win. So when you look at the best attorneys, you'll typically see that they're talking about winning a lot. And that's just because that's their personality. They want to win, and they thrive in environments where they're competitive. So they want to be competitive environments. And they're the kind of people that, and they say most law firms are like shark tanks because everyone's competing with each other. So if they're not competing about one thing, they'll find another thing to compete about. And they're often scared about being vulnerable. And they want to, so they will sometimes hide the ball and that sort of thing. And then they want to be seen as successful and powerful. And these are all characteristics of dominance. And they're all characteristics of many times the attorneys of the best law firms and the best attorneys, regardless of what firm they're at. And their goal and task. So the attorneys, they may have been, in most cases, have been dominant personalities there for the longest time. They wanted to go to the best colleges or do the best they could in college. They wanted to go to the best law school. Then they wanted to get the best job. They may be consider themselves in constant competition with other people, regardless of what they're doing. And then they also get into the best schools because they're able to do better than those around them that stand out. And they often will have the best grades in most curricular activities. They'll try to be president of this and that and the strongest looking backgrounds. And I don't know why people are that way, but these are just natural characteristics of people that are dominant. If you're dominant, then you're probably very suited to, and it doesn't mean it's the only characteristic, but you're probably very suited to working in large law firms and doing well there. And these people that I think in many cases, they're that way because they want to prove something. They want to prove something to themselves and others and to their parents, but they're perfect for major law firms in major cities. Most people that are very successful, they need to prove something. I know I was reading about Elon Musk the other day, and he was bullied as a child and right up until his teens. People made fun of him and pushed him around and beat him up and stuff for being nerdy. And look at him now. And same thing with Bezos. I met someone not too long ago that was in a club with him in Princeton, and just said he was very nerdy and socially awkward and all that stuff. So there's nothing wrong with that. people become very successful in many undertakings. They have something in their background that's motivating that. It could be proving something to their family or people that didn't believe in them. Who knows? But the thing is that the feedback you get from ultra competitive law firms and high paying law firms is often not that great. So you subject yourself to long hours, so forth, because you want to get that you want to get a little bit of positive feedback and you want to compete and you want to feel like you're achieving something, and people kill themselves for it. The dominant, it's like the Spartans, they will go into battle and they'll die or just they'll prepare and work all the time. And it's important in a major law firm. It's not every law firm attorney has to do that, but if you do want to work in many competitive environments, this stuff should come naturally to you. So you should be asking yourself if you have these characteristics, because it's very difficult to get ahead in most of these things if you're a wallflower, you're not competitive. You need to be motivated. And I don't make up these rules. It's just kind of how it works. And I meet attorneys all the time that I can tell have no business working in large law firms. And frankly, and these are the people that I like the best. And I've been in friendships with them and dated them in the past. And because they're actually much nicer people many times to spend time with than the competitive attorneys that are, you're constantly thinking about work and stuff and you're with competitive attorneys. But the attorneys that don't really belong firms are typically very nice. They're not competitive enough. They're very willing to follow. They're not that driven. They typically don't have anything to prove to anyone. Often they had very good childhoods and they're just very kind of content. They get along well with others, and they may be very smart and gone to good law schools and have other abilities, but they don't necessarily belong in large law firms. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And people come out of the best law schools every year because these law schools don't necessarily screen for that. They go to Harvard and Michigan and Columbia and all these other incredible law schools, and they're very good students, test takers, but that doesn't require being confrontational. They're having the dominant features. These law firms would, and the people in them would eat them alive, and they do. They go to big law firms and they get spit out like a virus, and they don't like it. They're not happy, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to be smart, but just because you're smart doesn't mean you're dominant. And that's one of the things to think about. And that doesn't mean you don't belong practicing law. There's plenty of other settings where dominance isn't necessary. Many attorneys that go to teach law in academia or public service, do clerkships, even become judges and so forth, are not always that competitive. And they're not dominant. But to be in most major firms and in big cities and stuff, you need to enjoy competing with others, and you really want to be able to get ahead and work hard, and you need to prove something. And you need to make as much money as possible and achieve something. Most big firm attorneys are motivated by the competition, and they're often concerned about their hours and money and how they appear to the outside world and how competitive they appear to others. And it's just how they work. And that's the mindset. It's interesting that I see attorneys, and the attorneys that work many times in the most competitive firms, markets like New York and so forth, they would rather not practice law at all than be seen as practicing at a less competitive firm. So they typically will either drop out of the practice of law completely, or they will many times, more often than not, go in house, which is considered a cool job. But they don't want to. They certainly don't want to appear that they're less committed and so forth, not doing as well because they're competitive. So these attorneys will undermine others. They'll work harder than them, and they'll always try and be the best. The more competitive law firm you are at, the more you're going to be around other people that are trying to dominate you and undermine you and make themselves look better than you, even if it's unnecessary. They'll do it socially, they'll do it politically, they'll do it with your work quality, they'll do it with innuendo and rumors and all sorts of things. And it's just part of the game, because when you put very competitive people together, that's what you get. And that's one of the reasons that the companies pay the most money for the attorneys from the best firms, because they're doing that not only with each other, but they're doing that with people opposed to their clients. And what those best law firms do is they'll channel that motivation and they'll make it profitable. They'll get lots of hours out of you. They'll praise you when you go a lot of hours and not praise you when you don't. And that's how they do it. And you need to be dominant for most large law firms. It's the way it works. At law firms, you can go into a law firm and talk with all sorts of enthusiasm about, but if you're interviewing, with how you're trying to get ahead, or how you had the most hours, or how you did this the best and that the best. And law firms love that. So they will try to channel that into lots of hours, and you continually making your work product better than your peers and so forth. Law firms will channel this natural characteristic that you need to feel important, better than your peers, and also to ultimately exploit you and make more money. And even partners are exploit is a tough word to use. I don't know that's really accurate because you could say that every doctor's exploited, every salesperson's exploited. I don't know that's the correct word, but I think that you will be to some extent. You will in a large law firm. You're gonna have to play the game, and even partners are exploited, and they're constantly on the pressure to bill more hours and to do more of this, more of that, and it's just a hamster wheel. And you people that do it, the idea of fulfillment comes through that. And that's what the firm is channeling that into. And because of that, the dominant thing, you need to get strength from the idea of competing with others and not feel weakened by it. So what happens is when you get into these kind of environments, if you're not necessarily dominant, you may become, even if you are dominant, if you're in a too dominant or competitive environment, you may become stressed and unable to handle the ramifications of mentally of working so many hours and comparing yourself to your peers. And so I've seen this happen just countless times with attorneys. It's that don't necessarily belong in that type of environment. So if you want to be part of a large law firm, you're generally going to need to be very dominant and really and be that way. Competing with others, task oriented, partners need to have as much business as possible. And if you don't feel like you're making the most money, most dominant people will leave. They'll be motivated by money. They'll be motivated by the quality of firm. And they're always going to want to be better firms, work with better attorneys, consider to be working with the most prestigious firms. Partners will want to have the best clients, and it just keeps going. You're comparing yourself to others because that's just the mindset. And I can't speak from a metaphysical point of view about whether or not that's a good thing. Most religions would tell you that pursuing anything like that, religions or philosophies, spirit would say not. If anytime you pursue something outside yourself like that, it's not going to lead to fulfillment. But for some people, it does, and it can. So that's something to think about. But many high people that are very dominant, and I've seen it, will conclude that they don't want to work in a major law firm. They look around them and they'll see other attorneys that are working lots of hours and not becoming partners or advancing in their careers. And because they're so motivated, they conclude that they would be more successful elsewhere and or doing something else, or they would be able to really realize those D characteristics more doing something else. And for them, often they realize that they're so competitive, it doesn't make sense for them to direct their energy inside a law firm, but they'll direct it elsewhere instead. And so a lot of Ds inside of law firms make this leap. I saw it when I was practicing. When I started at my first firm, there were some very motivated people there they left very quickly to start businesses and do all sorts of things. And so of course I did as well. But the most motivated people sometimes don't believe that they want to put that drive elsewhere. And if you run your own business or you may have more long-term potential and control over your time than an attorney in a large law firm. You have more potential if you want to do that, to become important and rich, like Jeff Bezos or other people that have done things like that, than probably working as an attorney. Takes care of businesses. To some extent, the law firm can constrain if you're very dominant. The most dominant people may not last in law firms because they believe they may have a partner, there's other attorneys that are deciding what's going to happen, whether or not the firm is bringing in enough work. So there's things that can limit you. Like any profession, there is an apprenticeship that can take a while, but at the same time, you can be very limited. But many law firms won't hire attorneys who've started businesses. Almost all of them won't, because they know that this highly dominant personality trait will take them again, and they will conclude that working in a firm is not conducive to their drive. And they want to basically get all the rewards of their drive and control things in a different manner. A lot of Ds that start businesses will go to law firms and try to steal clients, or it's the same thing that law firms do when they hire solo practitioners who left and started law firms. They don't like starting them because that's another sign that they may leave. So they want high D attorneys, but not necessarily ones that are likely to leave. And law firms hiring attorneys always calculate whether or not the person really is suited to working or practicing law in a large law firm, and understand whether or not the person is motivated and high D enough to succeed. But the best practice settings traditionally for IDs are large competitive law firms. Solo practitioners are having their own firm. being a business owner, leading companies. They can do very well at that. They can be good prosecutors because they get authority and they can put that in their role. Their major cities are a good place for them many times if they're in the right firm. Being a general counsel of a company can be good. I mean, being that depending on that. But the dominant personality needs to feel important, and they need to also feel like they're in control, like they're accomplishing something big compared to their peers. And it's funny when I look at resumes of very high D people, they'll always say stuff like, I was the first this, or I got an award for doing this, or people told me it's the best they'd ever seen. And those type of characteristics are something that typically large law firms, and they can channel that into things. So the worst practice settings, if you're a very high D and you find yourself very competitive and you find yourself someone that is likely to have issues with working in a law firm, or if you find yourself in a job where you're unhappy, a high D is not going to like most routine government jobs. People are kind of all equals in most routine government jobs, and there's not a lot of room for showboating. They're typically the attorneys may not be as competitive with one another. Academia can be a bad place. Public interest can often be a bad place unless you're leading the public interest organization. Judicial can sometimes often be a bad place because you're not competing with other judges. That could be a problem. But you're certainly the center of attention. And so I don't know, that's a little up in the air. Small town legal practice. Also, most in-house aren't the best jobs for high D people. They typically will get restless and want to do something else. So most dominant people want to be the center of attention and feel like they're accomplishing more than others. And they want to make as much money as possible and be seen as successful and powerful compared to their peers. And these positions just often don't allow for that. People just they're not like sticking out. They want to be around other people where they're very motivated. They can talk about their accomplishments and feel pushed by others. The best practice areas are typically, you're very good litigators, almost always a high dominant person. You can see it with their writing and talking in court, but they're not always that way. But most of the best ones are. The same thing with corporate attorneys. They want to lead deals, competitive about the kind of clients they bring in. Entertainment, same thing. They're competitive about who the clients are. Criminal law, a lot of family law people are that way. Labor and employment to some, but all these practice areas will allow the attorney to be the center of attention and to compete with others and to get a sense of winning and being the best. And they also tend to attract a lot of other very competitive attorneys, especially litigation, corporate, or two that are like that. Some of the worst practice areas for people that are high D are often bankruptcy. I've noticed. I think insurance coverage, real estate tax. You also have patent law, trust and estates. Those patent law and trust and estates can be very almost, I don't know, behind the scenes is the right word, but they don't require a lot of confrontation with other people. And they're often very routine, and the attorneys that do them aren't necessarily as competitive with each other in comparison to something like family law or litigation. And so that collaborative practice areas are often not the best. So to summarize, dominant, if you feel like you're dominant, you may be, the more dominant you are, the more suited you are probably to big firm practice and the practice here is related to that. The less dominant you are, you may still be suited to big firm practice, but at the same time, you probably want to be in certain practice areas and that. That's what it's influenced. And this is the second of the four. These will go a little bit faster now. And again, there's different practice areas that are more suited to the influencer personality than others. And someone who's an influencer has a desire to create their environment by influencing others. They're optimistic, they can be persuasive, talkative, they're often emotional and social, and they have all these characteristics. They often enjoy being around others very much. They don't want to, they're not afraid to be the center of attention. They tend to be very positive in their environment. So they're a positive force. They like when others approve of them. That makes them happy. They like to talk about ideas. They typically do not like spending time alone because they need to be able to influence others. And because of that, considered people that don't necessarily like a lot of ideas and are perceived to be disorganized. When they go to social events, they're always asking who's going to be there. They're going because they want to meet people. And the most suitable practice area for most influencers is litigation. The litigators write, express their ideas, talk, can be heard. They can get approval from others, court negotiations and so forth. That they enjoy going up against other attorneys in court and verbalizing their ideas and convincing clients about something and then bragging about what they've done later. All those things are exciting for them. Yeah. And they also like the idea when they're working that they're constantly interacting with others to get things done. And litigators will always like to talk about how they want single-handedly won a case. It was their idea and they always take credit. And it's funny actually, but it's what the best ones have as a characteristic. And the problem is that this personality type isn't always people that are very high influencers aren't always the best characteristic for large law firms. They're not always the best attorneys for large law firms. And because a lot of large law firms are actually looking for soldiers to do the work and not necessarily associates in the spotlight. And the same thing in law firms, there's partners that are service partners that are behind the scenes. And so they're not always influencers. You have contract partners and counsel on things and may be very good at the work, but they're not into drawing attention to themselves and taking credit. And a lot of times very high influencers sometimes will not survive in the largest law firms because they often are too eager for praise and so forth earlier in their careers. They'll actually leave, or even if they're very good at what they're doing, if they're not getting coddled earlier in their career. And the most classic kind of high influencer move is litigators that they'll move places because they want more courtroom experience or trial experience, and they'll move firms due to that. And the reason is most high influencers are unlikely to be happy in major law firms. So it's important for them to really have the opportunity to talk to people. They won't be happy with large law firms because they'll often be behind the scenes, like writing briefs and doing discovery and things and working on memos. And they really need to get out of their shell and to be seen. And so they'll often do things where they can be the center of attention, even if it means less money. And they're constrained by large law firms many times. And I've seen in my experience many of the highest influencers don't do well inside of the large law firms. They have enough influencer personality to write good briefs or to that sort of thing, but they don't necessarily need to be the center of attention. And the people that survive as litigators sometimes in large law firms are not always the highest influencers. They're often much more comfortable behind a desk in a court. And large law firms like this because many times the partners that are litigators are the influencers, and they don't want people around that are challenging them too much. And same thing in the large corporations. When they work for them, many lawyers are more technicians, they're behind the scenes, and they're attacking the work product technically of the other attorney, maybe coming at them for whatever reason. And then other practice areas, patent law, tax, ERISA, real estate, technology transactions, trust and estates, and corporate law are really much better suited many times for that aren't necessarily influencers. They're probably going to be more interested in being technicians and not grandstanding and that sort of thing. And one thing to understand too is that if you're an influencer, then it can really depend. You could be happy in firms. So the first firm that I worked at was only litigators, and the majority of the litigators in that firm tended to be influencers. And then the next firm I worked at was primarily a corporate law firm that had litigators in it. And so there, the litigators were actually, most of the people inside the firm were actually influencers. They were different because the culture had been built around servicing large institutional clients and being in the background and not drawing attention to themselves. So it just depends on the firm you're with, but different firms will award that influencer personality and other firms won't necessarily reward that personality. And so the best places for your influencers are really going to be anywhere. The practice settings are going to be where you can influence others and be around others. Influencers get strength from being around other people, and that is something that really helps them. So political office is good. Public interest is good. Many law firms welcome this personality. Sales jobs that do or do not require a law degree. Sometimes academics is good because the influencer can talk to other people. And high influencers really want to be around others and have the opportunity to shape them to the point of view, and they're social, and they really want and crave environments where they can talk to others and influence them. And the worst practice settings are typically places where the attorney isn't around others. You can't influence them. So that would be like often sometimes being a solo practitioner to some extent, depending on the solo practitioner. I don't know. Depending on the solo practitioner, the type of solo practitioner, that can also make a difference. And law firms that stifle the person's creativity are also not good. And many corporate environments where the attorney also may be faceless and nameless are not good as well. Those can be bad. And the big thing to remember is high influencer attorneys want to have their ideas heard and they want to be around people who will listen to them. And any practice area that doesn't allow them to verbalize and talk to others and communicate with others closely is likely to make them feel like they're doing something wrong. And many influencers will leave firms, and you may be in the situation when they feel like their ideas are not being taken seriously, or they're not around people to discuss their ideas. The best practice areas for most influencers are going to be litigation. Depending on the type of corporate work, some type of corporate work does allow for a lot of people to spend around time around each other, but most of it doesn't. But some types of corporate work, the entertainment law, like being a corporate generalist, or different types of corporate where you're meeting with clients a lot or meeting with other attorneys can be useful, but other ones not as much. Entertainment law is a good practice area for influencers. Criminal law, family law, very good one. And then some of the worst labor and trust in the states to some extent, if they can, go out and talk, meet people, a lot of different people, but most trust in the states attorneys really aren't much of an influencers. And then just different practice areas where they can be the center of attention, compete with others and get a sense of when you'd be the best. And then I think the worst practice areas are practice areas where an attorney may feel isolated and as if they're not connecting with and influencing others. So sometimes real estate could be that way, tax can be that way, patent, risk, many types of finance, overly clerical or transactional work that doesn't necessarily involve people and influencing them. It can also be quite limiting for attorneys. So it's important to understand if you're an influencer and that necessarily motivates you as well. And so the meaning of steadiness, that's the S in the DISC, so DISC, steadiness, is most attorneys really, it's the idea of being steady and in a supportive role. So someone who is steady is interested in cooperating with others to complete tasks that support others and also in maintaining stability. They can be described by the words cooperative, collaborative, stable, consistent, loyal, patient, all those sorts of words. Those words all connote stability. And steady personalities don't like change. They don't want to offend others. They tend to be dependable. They like to be in a role where they support others. They don't like being the center of attention and promoting them. They feel secure following rules and in a role where they will help others follow rules. So these are all things that are important to a steady person. And those are things that, attorneys in large law firms typically need. They need to be accepted by the group. They typically will like working with teams and cooperating, and they like consistency, but they don't enjoy confrontation. So the steadiness personality actually is something that I have found applies to a lot of lawyers, because lawyers like to be in a role where they're supporting clients behind the scenes and they're not necessarily the center of attention. The best lawyers will really take a lot of pride in the fact that they're helping another person with their problems and solving it. And so it's really more about the client than them. And most middle class professions, which attorney is one of them, and most professions are middle class, and being that in a negative way, but a profession, people like steadiness. Lawyers that work in most major law firms, rather than on their own, value steadiness and be part of a group. And the idea of going to good schools, to work for someone else, centers around supporting the need of someone else in exchange for a steady paycheck. And attorneys, by their nature, are representing the needs of others in the market. They're supporting them by protecting them from issues. Most look out for their client's interest and try to guard them against problems that might disturb the status quo. And then if you're representing a client transaction or a litigation matter, your goal really is to bring things back to a state of equilibrium for the client so they can complete the transaction, settle the case, and so forth. And a lot of attorneys will value steadiness more than others. But if you value it a lot, most attorneys that value a lot of steadiness will typically go into transactional work, I've noticed, or they'll want to work with others where they feel like they're cooperating. And then a lot of people that are natural attorneys will very aggressively gravitate towards rules and help their clients follow rules. And if you're not a natural attorney, you may look upon your to support others, be more concerned with yourself. And certainly a lot of attorneys are concerned with themselves, but the natural personality type of someone that's very good at it is about helping others and being motivated by that. And you need to really enjoy supporting others and solving the problems and contributing to the success of groups through your actions and being excited about solving the problems of others. And most happy attorneys really will prioritize this over their own needs. And if you're not motivated by that, you're typically not going to be that happy practicing law. And one of the problems I think that has happened over the past several years, 50 years compared to what it was 50 years ago, is that law has become more of a corporate type function, meaning it's starting to be run much more like large corporations are running themselves. And it's become quite depersonalized compared to what it may have been 50 years ago. Steadiness, personality is really geared towards assisting others, cooperative groups, and not feeling multitask. And in a large law firm, attorneys need to support others can often be pulled in a lot of different directions. And an attorney may be in a position of these days of working with a corporation that never interacts with it or never even talks to anybody. And in the other attorneys that they work with, it won't be necessarily a cooperative atmosphere. It'll be something different. And attorneys, they'll be in a kind of a hostile environment where people are leaving all the time. And so the attorney never feels safe. And so large law firms are often something many attorneys don't like because it doesn't, many people do go into law because they do value this personality trait. And so when they get into a law firm, they realize that this kind of trait of steadiness is really going to be rewarded. And so they often want to go in-house and they say they just want to work with one client. And that's often true. And they want to feel like they're supporting the client and making a contribution. And they want to feel like they're someplace steady and that they're working with a group. And all this is understandable, but it's really the opposite of what attorneys often find once they get in-house, because companies can go out of business, they merge, they hire and fire CEOs and general counsels and so forth, sell off businesses, get sued, close offices. So being in-house actually not supportive, but many attorneys are naturally seeking that. And what I did say earlier is that 50 years ago, the law was much different. And that was before large law firms got very large. And once they got large, they became like corporations. And before that, a much closer relationship between clients and attorneys would join a firm and the firms were much smaller and they were just different. And, and they were. I said a lot of attorneys that work in smaller to mid, which things like Wisconsin, Rochester, all these kind of smaller to mid-sized markets, they often have much longer and have years is trying to work in the largest markets. A lot of that has that in the mid-sized markets, the attorney protect each other a little bit more steadiness. There's less pressure to make a lot of money because there's not as patients and ways to spend it. And it's just not as much theirs or maybe in other areas. They often will do much better. I think the attorneys often protect more because they're connected in the community. And I don't know all the reasons, but those are some reasons. And I've noticed that a lot of attorneys, regardless of school, are just much happier. They kind of enjoy the practice a lot much more in these markets. And they really do salivate like mad dogs thinking about going to or you have it's much happier. So this is because firms in medium to smaller size markets really support natural kind of demand that the actual a lot of them do have for steadiness. But the best for most needs to feel secure are going to be government roles. They have a lot of long-term employment, hopefully have long-term employment times or support roles inside of law firm. So those could be things like, and sometimes even sections or working with attorneys doing inside of a law firm. Sometimes people even go into sometimes recruit of law firms or human resources is a better way of putting it. There's just a lot of different jobs you can do when you, a lot of times the best attorneys inside of maybe people that practicing as attorneys. Public can be good if there's a lot of steadiness. Academia can be good. A lot of judicial environments can be good. So I've seen people spend their careers working for judges. I've seen people do support roles inside of companies. A lot of times we're very happy working in a small family-owned law firms. Like I said earlier, small to mid is also a good one. Many times not as much conflict at any kind of market where, that they feels like they're supporting others, feel secure at the same. And, and that's important. Secure and not like they're under attack all the time. And they're more likely to let money in exchange for consistency than they might have. And they're not concerned about drawing it out and doing it necessarily limelight. So the settings, then when you want to feel secure, so large law firms law firms that have a over can be very companies turnover, conflict can be very scary. Things that kind of have drop dead dates where this generation get paid, positions where the compensation is variable and unpredictable. Law firms in major cities, a lot of turnover. So the idea is that attorney really is looking for safety and steadiness. And if they're getting that, then they will believe when you hear these kind of reasons, invest in my compensation or they require this, you're really hearing someone say, I value steadiness and I'm not getting it, or I don't feel like it's here. And so that those are some, and they don't look unpredictable. They don't conflict. Markets will often conflict and attorneys are unlikely to be happy with them. And the best practice areas are typically where the attorney's not in conflict. So where they're allowed to work behind the scenes. They often feel can be things in or transactional practice, tax, patent law, ERISA. Classic supportive tax attorney because they're expected to sit behind a desk, work a certain number of hours, know that they do this, they're going to be, so it makes them different personality types and enjoy this, but the supportive attorney does. And then many times practice, the attorney's in conflict with others, and there's some losers, and that things are often to be unpredictable. And these, I don't know, they're horrible practice areas, but again, study an attorney because you can find it in some firms, you can find roles and feel steady, but litigation, criminal, family law, I think trust in estates is one. I don't know if that was there, but these put attorney in conflict with other and often unpredictable. And so the typical attorney doesn't enjoy them. You just need to understand really the right kind of firm of practice can make a career. And then the following, the final one just to cover is conscientiousness. And this is really fairly important for most attorneys. And it's something that a lot of people will, in cases, come naturally. So conscientious, being careful, cautious, calculating, objective, systematic, critical. And if you're conscientious, you want to produce work that's not criticized, you challenging assumptions, you enjoy searching, coming up with and showing the expertise in the work you produce. If you're not that way, many times new attorneys often do accurate work. They often, especially summer associates, and they don't do these things, and they're not very careful with their work. And that's not a good audit trait for attorneys. Very conscientious in law firms, and law firms expect, and their clients expect, very well, meaning typos, grammatical error, or other issues. Us attorneys will often be very proud of produce, and it's often impossible to work in a major firm and be taken seriously unless you're very so conscientious is a quick way often to distinguish from the poorest ones. So when I was litigating, you would always see the worst law firms, which work product that wasn't carefully thought out, where the law wasn't cited properly, where there are typos, everything comes back perfectly. And larger the client, the more conscientious you're expected to be. Smallest firms with low stakes family, criminal matter, before personal injury, low level insurance. Those things are often, the work product isn't very good. The conscientiousness. And often, if an attorney is very rushed, their work won't be very conscientious. And then it's expect the work to be very well and to evaluate the work product for attorneys versus comparison. Careful, their legal conclusions are well reasoned. They're more likely to win the legal cases and do better with cracks and so forth when you're conscious attorney. So it's actually a very important character of attorneys. I've seen most of the best attorneys are extremely conscientious because to really think through things quickly, think through things in a lot of depth and be very careful. They take a lot of pride in their work, and it's conscientious is really natural. That's ingrained in them, and they don't need to be. They enjoy marking out papers and finding errors, tweaking contracts, documenting transactions, and all that sort of thing. Researching material, and it's just it needs only to you. Cool. I was taking this class with a professor, and he was there, and I was getting the best grade in his class, but he told me I shouldn't be an attorney, and I was like, "What are you thinking about?" He said, "Look at these guys." And you look down, there was some guy can underlining very aggressively. I said, "This being an attorney, very, I don't know if he used the word, extremely uptight with details, and for you, thing that comes naturally to you." Now, I actually learned it and became very good at it, but honestly, the truth is that this is a highly valued, especially in large law firms. Attorneys make their errors, finding errors, they're making errors, attacking the errors by their attorneys and so forth. So be like that. And if you don't, then you're going to lose. You're going to get the bad side of D. Let's say on the defensive, you're going to be sued for malpractice. And the best attorneys are also very calculating. They're like chess players. They deadlines and insert provisions into contracts at the last second. So it's not expecting all sorts of information to their advantage. And you need to thrive. It should come naturally. And if these games don't come naturally, that you're not well suited to being an attorney. You need to be calculated in time. And you need to know that sometimes attorneys are overly calculating and that people you're going to be against, and you're going to lose against partners. They rip up work. You're going to lose things for your clients, and it's just not a good thing if you don't have it. And this is something you can develop, but you need to really get a passion for details. And you can certainly practice settings other than large law firms. If you're teaching, you're debating ideas, coming up with theories and so forth. And I've noticed that a lot of law professors, I mean, that they're not lawyers practicing and their thinking's not as crisp, but open to new ideas and they come up with really brilliant things. And that helps them and it helps their a law firm is so the least conscious will find themselves working at facing branches or professions with legal skills, but aren't expected to produce flaw. And that's as a general rule. And I don't know why it is, but the most conscious typically go to the best law schools and often they get because they have always conscientious with all the doing and they need to test and stuff. I don't know, but it's practice settings for your conscience for big, anywhere work is being done at a very low places, high emphasis on quality, structured legal environments. Judges often reward that. It can be very important in some environments. People that went to top law school, worked in top firms, often are conscious. All of them are law firms that do work for big companies or another. And the attorneys typically end up with the largest firms or with the largest clients. Go where there's money with that. And most lawyers and major law firms are very conscientious. If you are conscientious, you're not conscientious, just then don't want to work in these kind of environments like high quality standards, support unstructured environments, many small towns. You'll go crazy because you'll facing law firms because you'll see that it'd be sent out that's not good. And I'm in that all consumer facing attorneys conscientious. And consumer facing like divorce, consumer bankruptcy, injury, different things. And there's some that are really conscientious, but they're oftentimes more likely to be less conscientious for major law firms because they have to get work done quickly. And practice areas typically can be a perfectionist. And with the law firm will allow them the time to do that. So would be there's certain firms that will only give a patent amount of time to write a patent. The best patent attorneys often because they feel like it's not detail. I don't know. But any practice area where they feel like they can pay for doing good work for them. So tax can be good, like RISA, patent that often are the most conscious. But litigation, being conscientious, requires being extremely conscious. But if you're that helpful, and then the worst practice areas typically are conscientious or ones where for money. If you're doing consumer-facing bankruptcy, personal injury, law, maybe required to. So the extra and I would encourage one of these personality tests. There's a ton of online, including one ready that we've developed BCG for attorneys. But it's really you need to understand what your personality strengths are to avoid practicing. You're unlikely to do well. So I will take questions. I hope there's a lot of questions today. I'm going to take a quick break for just a couple of minutes. And then when I come back, I will answer questions about this or anything you guys have about girls, about ladies, about any of the questions, career. And this is favorite week is answering these questions. I love these questions. They're all anonymous and I'll answer questions that you guys. Thank you. Yeah. She has it short. Hey, I want to green you questions. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to stop this Word docs. Yeah. So 1 second. To ask you guys any questions you have about anything, because the questions are all very helpful for other people. Jim, let me just share my screen. I'm practicing at 15 to 20. I often feel frustrated or angry or jealous when I see others. Sometimes I feel it should be past tense. I feel my supervisor plays favorites and other associates because they might prefer working with women, etc. That's not exactly why, but that is dynamic. Is this sick on my part or should I just ignore it? Okay, so that's actually a great question. And I like that question. So I always tell people, sorry about that, guys. The looks like we lost the internet. I may have to. This particular question was the first it again, but it says I'm 15, 20 person firm practicing. If you have questions, if you could ask them again, let me just figure out how to get those back. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so I'll just this specific question. So this person wrote, I'm practicing 15 summer associate. I often feel jealous when I see other summer getting assignments that feel should be passed on and so forth. What I tell people when their goal really is to get to the next interview, to the next, then you're not, if you do get the next interview, the goal is to get the job. If it's a final interview. So this is what you do in interviews. When you're in an interview, you don't ask or say result in you not getting another interview. It's likely to result in another interview or getting hired. So those are the two big things that you say. So you don't ask, now this will all make sense about how it's connected in a second. Not ask, let me make sure I'm sharing. I want to ask about things. Give me 1 second. Okay. Ask about, I don't know, the firm and things like that. So it's going to leave in their mouth, and they're going to want to hire someone, et cetera, whatever those kinds of things are. The rule is when you're a summer associate is you basically you want to ask about, you don't want to ask, you don't want to do things it'll make it unlikely for you to get an offer. So you need to do anything you possibly can to get an offer. So that means no sour grapes, no entitlement, no things that show problems. And the way to basically, the way to make sure you avoid that stuff is basically, I recommend asking these sorts of questions. I recommend just doing your work and not worrying about and let your work speak for itself. Sometimes being in the background time and not being close is actually a good thing. I would recommend doing whatever you possibly to do that. So that was helpful. Thank you. So the question I just answered. Okay, so this next question is, let's see here. And I apologize for us. We lost the internet here. I don't know exactly what happened. It'd be nice to have backup internet. It says, my DISC assessment characterized me as extremely conscientious and steady. My practice has always been corporate work. And yes, my corporate work in large law firms. Let's see here. Does this seem like a good fit? I would like to experience relating to perfect. But yeah, I think steady is actually anxiety that you're experiencing actually just means that you're very conscientious and steady, and those are good character for you. So I personally would recommend doing whatever you can to improve to stay in the kind of work that you're doing. Aspects of the work you don't, that work where you're able to get exposed to high level work where the quality of your work is appreciated and praise you for it and you like it is if I was you, I would avoid working in environments where your conscientiousness and steadiness are rewarded. I don't know what titles you held, but if you're just very conscientious and steady and you're not business or influence and that sort of thing and domineering, you might be a very good service partner or counsel or in a senior role. Do that. And sometimes people that are extremely talented like you are could be even part of large law firms and business comes to them. And so I think it sounds like you're in the right fit. It's actually good that you're trying to do a good job. Exactly what large law firms want to see. Okay, let's see. Another question. Will this deck be available? Yeah, so we are actually taking all these decks and they're BCG. There's also, if you look up the title of this webinar, there's an article that it's based on. You can get that there as well. Talking about transactional lawyers, you mentioned many type of finance positions, or you mentioned many other finance. What other type of positions you mean under it? Well, by many other type of finance is a position. There's people that do things like put together agreements for packaging, a bunch of leases and selling them. There's all sorts of there's secured transactions. There's all sorts of different finance practice groups. So you can find most of those on BCG, but most that would be finance. This is an interesting question. As a lawyer who graduated from law school, can you work at a good law firm? Absolutely. Lots of attorneys go to medical law, they don't even do well and end up in the top law firms. Sometimes it takes a while for a legal career to take off. What typically ends up happening is if you do very good work and you're able to work on behalf of clients and you're able to make clients like you, then you can get into a big law firm just by as a partner as you get more and more business, and probably laterally to bigger and bigger firms. Another way you can get into a better law firm, you can specialize in it's in demand at different points in time. Different practice areas are very in demand. And then if you're doing that practice area and specializing, you can move into a better law firm. One of the things that I would recommend for all attorneys really is to do what you can to always to specialize in practice areas where you are in any type of work, as long as it's not consumer facing, and end up in a big kind of law firm. And there's good law firm consumer facing, but the key really is to specialize and to get very good and known in your practice area. Some of the mistakes that a lot of people make is they will try to go into a practice area where they're not getting, where they're doing a lot of different things. So you need to specialize to end up in a good law firm, and then get better and known in your practice area. And that's the best pieces of advice I can give you to do that. This is a question. Is a PhD in law idea at 30? I want to continue with a lawyer afterwards. What do law firms do when hiring a lawyer for 3 years? Would a PhD be hindering my career for such? Yes, I do think hinder your career. It's counterintuitive. Like, why would a PhD? It comes right down to it. The practice of law, it certainly is intellectual, and I don't mean that in a way of traditional intellectual, but it's more than theory. The problem with PhDs and so forth, that you're getting a little bit of this stuff, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it would be very interesting to get a PhD. Problem is it's very obscure, more motivated by academia and so forth than you are by practicing. Certain firms don't even like it if you do a clerkship because they think they offer experience in clerkships. So it depends on. I don't think a PhD would probably be the best thing for you. The PhD, it's just a different thinking process. Even today, when I talk to academic attorneys and professors and stuff, they're thinking it's the thinking big firm stuff is just very you. And actually, all good attorneys, you cut to the chase, and there's a lot of theory, and the different style of thought and academic. And after an academic, there's nothing wrong with academia if that's what you want to do. But at 30 and you want a PhD is probably not your best idea, just because it is a career for women in terms of gender bias. How do they get a position in a law firm? Lawyers are great, and there's lots of very well-known and very good corporate lawyers, and there's a demand for corporate lawyers in law firms, and they corporate also and leaders of companies and women general counsels, and lots of women inside of firms, inside of companies that they get business from. So I think being a women corporate attorney is a great idea. I've definitely heard about gender bias in the past, but I do know that if you find the right firm, you do very well. And in all areas of society right now, there really is a push to try to diversify the ranks of attorneys, whether it's women in corporate law or different groups of people, and that law firms are going to conform and be very similar to their clients. And so that is just in terms of the diversity of people and allowing different groups of people to get ahead without bias. And so there is, to some extent, in most law firms, and today there's some for mistakes that have been made. And so as a woman attorney, you may find yourself being more likely taken out on business pitches and learn than you would have in the past. So I think it's a great group of women. I think you have a better chance of getting ahead. This next question is, I'm confused between getting an LLM and joining a good law firm. What should I do? What will help me better for the law firm is the best thing to do. The LLM is often there certainly are important things you can LLM, but practicing law in a firm is usually much different than the kind of work you would do just getting your LLM rule. I think you're more likely to be better off joining a good firm. LLMs are often, and I don't say this but they're often considered makeup degrees. So you can put a good law school on your resume if you didn't go to a good law school. Sometimes they're good degrees from the perspective that you can specialize in something. So you may want to do about health law and get or ERISA or different type of practice areas where you have a little bit of a background but not enough education law. And so sometimes it can be very good for specialized practice areas, but they're not something that can change how you did as in whatever law school you originally went to, give you a good entree I've seen lots of people get hired, for example, in health law and education law and other practice areas that got LLMs in that. And it was very helpful to them, and they even went straight through. But you should be very careful. Law schools are businesses, and they offer these classes to generate money. And the admission standards for most LLM programs, and I'm saying most, not all, are it's the law schools. They're often used by people from foreign countries to get into the US, or attorneys that didn't go to the law schools they would have preferred to, and then to get a better law school resume. So but in terms of what's going to help career, you really want to concentrate on trying to get into the best law firm you can, and you should be careful with the LLM program. Like being a tax lawyer is a very difficult. A lot of attorneys will get tax LLMs, but then not get tax jobs. And so if you're joining an LLM program, you should try to get employment statistics and figure out if you really enjoy a certain practice, it's a cool thing to maybe get an LLM in it and learn about it. But those would be my suggestions. And this question's interesting. As a tax lawyer, is it better to start my career in a law firm or an accounting firm? So for tax lawyers, it's generally start in a law firm. The reason is because it's very difficult to move from an accounting firm to a law firm. And people do it all the time, and I've certainly done it with several. But if you can get a job from right away, that's better off. The problem is it's very difficult to get. There's a lot more tax attorneys than there are tax law jobs and tax jobs in law firms. So you need to really do what you can to transition in a law firm if you can. Now, getting a job in an accounting firm is not something that it will stop your career, and it's not mean a law firm, but it's definitely much easier to go from an accounting firm than it is to go from an accounting firm to a law firm. The reason is most law firms will assume you didn't get a job in a law firm when you wanted to, and when you went to work in an accounting firm, because accounting firms traditionally pay much less than law firms, and so your brand isn't as strong if you start an accounting firm. But one thing I would say is, if you're not trying to get to work a job in the most major law firms, the training you get in an accounting firm is excellent. The tax attorneys inside of accounting firms are just as good as ones in law firms, if not better, because they're surrounded by a lot of other people doing it. It's just there tends to be a little bit of prejudice against attorneys from working in accounting firms than there is in the other way around. I'm glad we're getting more questions. I apologize for all these, for the interruption with the internet failing, which doesn't happen very often. I've yet to take a DISC questionnaire, but I'm very interested in doing so. My guess is I'll be high in dominance, medium in influential, medium unsteadiness, and high in conscientiousness. Interesting. I'm also a law student who's been able to get a job at a big firm, so I've been a top. I always thought it would be a good fit, and my lack of success in getting a big firm job is a sign that I should not be at one. Absolutely not. So this is ridiculous. Because you didn't get a job at a big law firm while you're in law school, or even after law, doesn't mean you'll never work in one. I place people in big law several times. Company does that started off in small law firms, schools, all of them. So it doesn't necessarily where you go to law school. It doesn't matter what firm you start out at. It's the skills you have to offer the law firm. So everything is like a horse race, and you want to apply to large law firms after a year or two, you can. So the idea is, and I've given this example before, but what happens is the horse race starts like this, and this may right here, graduating from law school, and then it goes, and then but people are always dropping out of the race. So this may be, some people drop out here, which is in law school. Other people drop out, and then they get back in the race, and they drop out here after a year or practicing law. A lot of people do. So your objective really, if you start, you can keep going, and the idea is there's going to be far fewer people than there were in law in your practice area after a couple of years in your location than there were when you started. So if you move to a certain market and you want to work in a big firm later on, there's really nothing stop getting a job there if you continue to apply yourself. Most people that went to great law schools, even if they didn't work as a summer associate, always get jobs in big firms if they want to eventually. You just have to think about everything that went wrong when you're interviewing, what you could have done different. Jobs you applied to, did you only apply through on campus, or did you apply other ways? And that's really how look into it. Any negative potential consciousness, looking at the merits. I don't know if there's not necessarily consequences. It's not my role to comment on how functions and works. I do know that law firms do have to be concerned about diversity quotas, because I don't know if they're necessarily quotas, but you have to be concerned about them because of the fact that their clients are diverse. I have 20 white guys representing a company when the company is made up of a reflection of the makeup of America, which is different races and people from different points of view. And that's part of the problem I think that a lot of are faced with when they don't have a lot of diversity. Now, does that mean that that's the hiring, that people get in hired places and that maybe they normally wouldn't? These quotas, of course, but it's like that with colleges, it's like that with law schools, it's like that in different areas of society. And frankly, for the longest time, people were getting into schools and stuff based on connections, that the people that were white, for example, if their family went there, they had money and stuff. So the things that society is trying to balance. You get into firms to work, or they're not smart enough, yeah, then that's a problem. Ready to compete, and so the have to figure out how to address that, because if you're someplace and it's difficult in your, for example, I've had the experience before, so this is a decent sized company, like the company that I run, but it's certainly not a major company like General Motors. I've had the experience around from major companies, and they're than I do. This is companies that are large public companies. They've told and problem solving and different net. So you have to, everyone has to go with a group where they're likely to succeed. And I personally don't think at this point in my career that I would succeed leading a major U.S. corporation, because I couldn't compete with other people that have had experience doing that. That would be so. My only point is, I guess, I don't think there's negative consequences. I think that there's what needs to happen. I think for to go the direction that it's trying to go, is you need to understand the forces that ultimately are preventing different groups of people from succeeding. And if you understand those, times that means that society needs to step and maybe make it a little, I don't know, right word, but to give certain advantages than even when they get into firms to succeed, that they normally help and letting them fail. And that's been the problem with a lot of schools and a lot of that people can get into them and they don't succeed. The only thing that anytime a law firm is, they have this for example, in India, they have a percentage of people that need to be hired from different, they have different castes there. So they have this Dalit, these low, they're trying to balances in government jobs. This is all positive stuff. It just depends on how the law firms need to be set up to help people with a lot of stuff. And a lot of these natural characteristics that I talked about today, which is like disc profiles and everything, I apologize, things that are important for people to succeed in firms. The biggest problem I see is when people do fail, and then their confidence is hurt, and so that happened to me. If I went to try to be a CEO of a giant company, I might think that I should never lead a company again. I wouldn't understand all the rules that go along with it. So things to think about. I don't think there's any negative consequences to law firms. I think trying to fill diversity quotas, and who's to say that their diversity hires are not all based on the merit. Multiple firms that have very good diversity, and everyone that's there deserves to be there. And every person that's hired is not hired, that's a diverse candidate, is not hired for diverse reasons. A lot of things. It's also about adding to the social political fabric of the firm and making it stronger. Different points of view, then they're able to understand different types of clients instead of just approaching problems in one way. So I think diversity is great. I've actually written a book about it. You can that I made for free on the site and on BCG, but it's an interesting topic, and it's definitely, there's a lot of stuff going on in society about it right now that I think could be very helpful. Okay, this next question. What's it like ultra elite law? Okay, so there's different types of ultra elite law firms, but ultra elite law firms they typically will have the sort of work you're doing. They will treat you often with a lot of respect because you'll be assumed to work, so forth. And there's the partners there are venerated, and there's a distance between partners and law and associates, and the partners are often very competitive with them. And there's different types of ultra elite law firms, but for the most part, there's the ultra elite law firms one of the biggest things are conscientiousness of the people that work there. So I would say any characteristic of what I talked about today, conscientiousness is probably one of the most important things. And that means detail, spending a lot of time on work. Ultra elite law firms will, at a different level, people looking at work, they'll take the work product very seriously. Then the people be very highly developed and everybody be very, you'll see things in little things that you wouldn't see in other firms that happen there. Okay, goal, career progression. That's an interesting question. I like this one. At a prestigious corporate law firm. So most associates, prestigious law firms end up at some point in the future going to work a small law firm. That's typically what happens. The most prestigious corporate law firms are very difficult to make partner in because they've long ago filled their corporate spots. But the most prestigious corporate attorneys that do the best fairly early in their career, when they're 4 or 5, will start bringing in smaller clients and bringing in business, even larger clients too. Or they'll just work very hard and become experts in different transactions. So prestigious is if you're in a large corporate law firm, a prestigious corporate law firm, you'll typically be able to do very well. A lot of them end up in-house, a lot of stuff you can do in a prestigious corporate law firm, but that's typically the progression. A lot of them, when I practice, I'm just thinking of the people that I worked with. Most of them are in-house now. They general counsel, different kind of or interest. A couple more questions. Let's see here. Work in large law firms, corporate, small, medium-sized law firms. This is an interesting question. In your background and what you want, I recommend people work in the largest law firm they can. And the reason is because you're going to get exposure to work. You'll get exposure to all sorts of different types of people that are likely to help grow your career. You'll get exposure to all sorts of different types of matters, training very highly paid attorneys by the clients are paying a lot of money for, and you'll learn to go in depth with things. As you get older, it becomes increasingly clear that you may or may not make partner. If you don't want to stick with that, then I personally think law is best than in-house individual. If you go to a medium-sized law firm, you're going to get a different experience in a small one. Typically, people go to smaller to medium-sized law firms. They value the collegiality or to bring in smaller clients they might not be able to in a large law firm, but that's again up to you and depends on the size market you're in. Typically, you're going to have more opportunities the larger the law firm to bring in, and the smaller the law firm, more opportunities to bring in smaller. Corporations are good, but corporations aren't always stable. It's up to you. Now, I've written articles about the advantages of working in boutique law firms, of working in large law firm corporations, and I would recommend reviewing those. Okay, so law firms, this is the I guess I'll take today. Law firms have different types of partners. So they have typically partners, junior partner, and then they'll have equity partner. So to become a partner firm, typically written about this in a lot too, but typically to be a partner in a law firm just requires a lot of dedication. So the law firm needs to be convinced that this is really your number one priority in your life, a partner in them. And the question will add, and this is it really? And then we'll see power and can do what it takes. And equity partners, the idea is you need to go all out, and this is your life. So that's the best way to think about it. I think that in order to, you need to show commitment, believe that you're the kind of person that can bring in business. They need to believe that the number one priority in your to serve this law firm and do the absolute best work you can. And if they see that and they believe it, then you're competing with people that are also in your class and other people trying to become partners. So in many cases, it depends on the size of the law firm. The larger the law firm, the more likely you are, the harder it's going to be. And the smaller the law firm, many times the easier it's going to be. So it does require a lot of expertise. It requires very good at what you're doing. And I think the number one thing is really commitment. The more committed you seem, commitment, passion, and that sort of thing. So the law firm wants to basically say this person is representative of what we are. And then ultimately a lot of more money, kind of money. Can you mean, which is hours, et cetera. So the law firm really has to look at you and law firm has to say, this person provides so much value. value, we would be nuts. So they have to look at you, and you're in a position where, where you are throwing off so much value that the law firm would be nuts. Then they will make you a partner. It's really the main. There's how much the calculation that goes into that is going to be different, but that. And then I think those are all the questions. So from being here today, I apologize. We had a lot more people on the call before that happened, but again, I'll be back next week, and thank you for listening.